Bad guys. We all love them, or we love to hate them. Everybody can usually relate to the bad guy because secretly, I think we all kind of want to be bad ourselves. And when I had that thought, it made me think, well, who were some of my favorite bad guys? So that's what's made me come up with this list here. Top 9 supervillains you could relate to. Let's go.
Big green like the Hulk, no lie. Superman through a cloud so high. Blowed Marvel up in the sky. That's I, nerdy McFly. Bruce Wayne fresh, I'm that guy. Mastermind, catch your girlfriend's eye. Professor X-Men rolling all night. That's I, nerdy McFly.
Number 9, Mr. Freeze. Like most longtime Batman villains, Mr. Freeze started off as another run-of-the-mill villain being evil just for the sake of being evil. He even started off with a different name, going by the boring title of Mr. Zero. He would only gain the name Mr. Freeze after the character was introduced to TV in the 1960s on The Batman Show with Adam West. No true motivation behind the character relegated Mr. Freeze to just another little-known minor annoyance in the Batman Rogues Gallery. Once again, though, TV wound up being the savior for Mr. Freeze, as his backstory was revamped for the Batman animated series. Now, Victor Freeze, pronounced Freeze, get it, was painted as a sympathetic character who was only trying to save the life of his beloved wife, Nora. Fans of the show were captivated by the new Mr. Freeze, and the comic books quickly added this new backstory to his character there. Now, almost 25 years later, we're all still captivated by the love-torn villain. Most of us know the extremes we'd go to save the ones that we love. Number 8, Magneto. By now, the story of Magneto's tragic past is legendary. Shown on film from several points of view by 2 different actors in the past 19 years has fleshed out Magneto's backstory more than any other comic book villain before him. A truly sympathetic monster that every human could relate to. Each of us has been wronged in some way and wished we had the power to strike back at those who harmed us. Using the all-too-real and horrible events of World War II as his past, we are shown how Magneto was victimized already for his cultural background when he first manifested his mutant powers. Understandably, he quickly sees his new powers as a way to avenge the murder of his mother and other family members by the Nazis. In the end, though, he's corrupted to hold similar views as the Nazis, and even goes so far to rename mutants as Homo Superior. Magneto shows us how easily the hurt we experience can turn us into the same things we despise, and why it's so important to not let our hate and anger consume us. Number 7, Harley Quinn. Originally, I was not going to include Dr. Quinzel due to her newfound anti-hero status. This has only been in the last 7 to 8 years of the character, though, and came about mostly during the much-criticized New 52 iteration of the DC Universe. Since her turn to a more heroic character and massive visibility and exploding marketing potential, we already see DC, well, Warner Brothers mostly, who own DC, pivoting away from Harley's more past dubious acts with the Joker and trying to play her as more of a victim to the Joker than what she actually was. Harley Quinn was created in 1992 for the Batman animated TV series as Joker's henchman/lover. From 1992 till just around 2010-2011, every iteration of Harley Quinn, from comic book to video games, was villain through and through. Harley does deserve a place on this list. What makes Harley a sympathetic villain is also her love affair with the Joker. A talented, sophisticated, and educated woman is driven down dark paths due to a bad relationship with a controlling and manipulating man. Many people have loved the wrong person and toughed it out thinking they could change the other for good, only to end up being dragged into an abyss of pain and despair. While the Joker always has and always will be a sadistic and evil person, Harley was not just a victim. She was an accomplice. A willing and eager participant in some of the Joker's most heinous plans and crimes, Harley even has gone on to form groups with other villains at times, proving her villainy even further. In several stories, she even bested the Batman herself in order to show her puddin' that she was just as capable a villain as he. The only difference is that Harley did it all for the love. She allowed herself to become what she vowed to treat and cure, due to love and her own slight arrogance in her abilities to fix another human being. It is these flaws in her character that make Harley such a relatable villain and anti-hero, because these are mistakes we have all made in our pursuit for companionship and love. Number 6, Harry Osborne, aka Green Goblin 2. Growing up in the shadow of a successful or famous parent has been proven to be difficult. Many children of the super rich and famous have difficulty finding their own way in life, finding their own identity outside of their famous lineage. Now imagine all of that, plus your parent being an evil, manipulative, narcissistic genius supervillain to boot. This is the world Harry Osborne lives in. Every day told his efforts aren't good enough or up to measure for his namesake, Harry becomes an aloof snob masking a drug habit. While most of us may never know someone with the types of comic book wealth Harry has, we all know a privileged person or two who fits this mold. Harry's descent into madness only increases after it is revealed that his father was the supervillain Green Goblin, and the reveal of Peter Parker as Spider-Man. His father and best friend hiding such huge secrets while both chastising him for his hidden drug habit push Harry over the edge. It almost seems inevitable that Harry was drawn into following his father's footsteps. Forever haunted by the notorious family name and evil deeds of his father, Harry's story is more akin to a Greek tragedy than a comic book story. Number 5, Ozymandias. Extreme intelligence has always been considered a gift and a curse. Stories of brilliant men and women who were driven to madness by their knowledge of the world have been told by every culture around the globe. Comic books alone have spun this trope so much that nowadays it is considered a cliche. In the Watchmen universe, Ozymandias was the smartest man alive and hence had figured out how to solve most of the world's problems. His problem, though, was people. Ozymandias just needed people to get with the program, and he knew he could lead them into a new utopia. I'm sure most of us have felt the same way about one thing or another in life. We'd be able to get things running smooth at work if everyone did it the way I do it. Take that feeling and magnify it by 1,000, and you will come close to how Ozymandias must have felt every day. While he did end up killing millions and alienating himself from the few people he could call friend, ultimately his plan worked, and he was able to usher in world peace. Now ask yourself, with what we know about humans' ability to self-sabotage, if you were in his shoes, would you have followed through with the plan? Even if you wouldn't have, you still had to think about it, which makes him relatable indeed. Number 4, the Lizard. Curt Connors dedicated his life to science, studied and trained to become one of the leading scholars and scientists in the field of genetics, all for one purpose: to find out how to regrow his amputated arm. I have no idea how it feels to have a physical disability, but I could only imagine the lengths I would go to get access to a missing limb. It was this very desire that led Dr. Curt Connors to cut corners, and he ended up performing his own experimental test on himself with less than stellar results. Through his very own actions, he becomes the monstrous lizard and unlocks the more reptilian side of his psyche, becoming a cold and calculating monster. Curt Connors ended up achieving his goal of regrowing his lost limb, but at the cost of losing touch with his own humanity. Many of us have lost touch with our inner selves in the pursuit of physical happiness. Number 3, Killmonger. I'll be honest, I did not read very much of the Black Panther comic books growing up. What little I knew about Black Panther was from his appearances in the random crossover events that Marvel would do all the time. Whew, my bad. So, I was very surprised to find that the Killmonger character from the movie and the comic books were not very far off from each other. In the sake of all fairness, Eric Killmonger from the movie resonated with me for very personal reasons. Both of my parents were involved in the black social movement in the 70s and early 80s, and I was just a fly. So much of the twisted rhetoric that he spouted throughout the movie was very familiar to me and reminded me how easy it was and is to become a villain through victimization. Many of us have felt the victim at times in our lives and let that lead us to becoming the one to victimize others. Killmonger, much like Magneto, had allowed his past pains and those of his people's history to justify his anger and villainous acts. With Killmonger adding in the all-too-real effects of systemic racism to not only Black Americans, but Black people globally, it's no wonder the Killmonger was right memes dominated social media sites for months after the release of the Black Panther movie. Ask yourself, if you had the chance to rule a country that could even the odds for you and your people almost overnight, would you not be tempted to do whatever it took to take the throne? And what would you do once you had it? Number 2, Poison Ivy. Now, in case my theories on a past technologically advanced global civilization are wrong, I'll say to our knowledge, at no other time in human history have we been so collectively concerned about global warming and our treatment of the planet we live on. Which also makes the Poison Ivy character one of the most relatable and relevant villains in comic books today. How Warner Brothers has not capitalized on this fact by casting her as a main baddie in one of the DCU movies is a horrendous and incredibly stupid move. With the exception, and very large exception, of the Batman and Robin movie from 1997, Bat Nipples. Every iteration of the Poison Ivy character has been fascinating and creative. Like most of Batman's rogues gallery, Ivy's motivations have changed over the years. But since the 90s, those motivations are Mother Nature's protection. She is not too concerned with the comings and goings of humans, except when we hurt her beloved nature. Sadly, this is something you humans tend to do all the time, which keeps you at odds with the Green Protector. For those of you who are gravely concerned with how you mistreat the environment, you would probably also be considered villains if you had the powers of Poison Ivy. Is the planet and all the other life it supports also not important? Perhaps you should be stopped at any cost. Number 1, Mewtwo. He was birthed in a lab, prodded and poked the entirety of his life by doctors and scientists who viewed him as only a specimen to be tested on. Created and bred to hate the very beings that created him by their own daily actions. Then one day, the opportunity to escape presented itself. That escape, though, only showed Mewtwo how deep the treachery of the world he lived in goes, as he discovered the whole of his species is captured and used in violent, pointless battles for human amusement. Now, I'm not a Pokemon fan. The little bit I know about it is from when my children were fans of the games and the cartoons in the late 90s and early aughts. So I was horrified inside as I sat in a crowded theater to watch Pokemon the first movie, as they cheered on Ash and his pack of institutionalized Pokemon as they fought against the one creature that cared enough to fight back against their human captives. I silently cried to myself as my little larvae enjoyed their popcorn and sugar water and reveled at Mewtwo's failings. In that moment, I felt Mewtwo's disappointment, and so was I disappointed at my failings as a father, since my children were cheering for oppressors before my very eyes. For an eternal rebel such as myself, no other villain will be as relatable to me as Mewtwo, the most misunderstood of his kind, all because of his justified anger in the treatment of he and his species. Being that his kind are still imprisoned in his universe, he is justified in his anger even more than Magneto and Killmonger. That is why Mewtwo is the Malcolm X of the Pokemon world and my number 1 pick for most relatable villain, because he's only a villain to the establishment, which makes him all right with me. So there you have it. There's my list. My top 9 most relatable villains. Tell me what you think. Am I right? Am I wrong? Did I forget somebody? You fill in number 10. And don't forget, leave a like or a comment down below. Tell me what you think. I'll holla at you.
Yeah, Nerdy McFly. Yeah, Nerdy McFly.